Good morning. It is Thursday, January the 10th, and this is The Drill. And thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. So, speaking to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, when the waters were changed, once upon a time, man was given a warning. At a certain date, all the water in the world, which had not been specially hoarded, would disappear. It would then be renewed with different water, which would drive men mad. Only one man listened to the meaning of this advice. He collected water and went to a secure place where he stored it and waited for the water to change its character. On the appointed date, the stream stopped running, the wells went dry, and the man who had listened, seeing this happening, went to his retreat and drank his preserved water. When he saw, from his security, the waterfalls again beginning to flow, this man descended among the other sons of men. He found that they were thinking and talking in an entirely different way from before. Yet they had no memory of what had happened, nor of having been warned. When he tried to talk to them, he realized that they thought he was mad, and they showed hostility or compassion, not understanding. At first he drank none of the new water, but went back to his concealment to draw on his supplies every day. Finally, however, he took the decision to drink the new water because he could not bear the loneliness of living, behaving, and thinking in a different way from everyone else. He drank the new water and became like the rest. Then he forgot all about his own store of special water, and his fellows began to look upon him as a madman who had miraculously been restored to sanity. And this perfectly illustrates the struggle that we have in the United States today. It is not a struggle over politics, but a struggle over sanity. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the Ayn Rand Lexicon, and then from Tammy Bruce's Right and Wrong, and The Black Book of the American Left by David Horowitz. Thank you very much, and welcome back. Today's concept is economic good. In order for a thing to become a good, three conditions must be fulfilled. Not only must it satisfy a human need, but also one must know that it satisfies one's need, and one must have disposal over it. Economic good from the Ayn Rand Lexicon. And so now instead of taking a break, I'm just going to go, try that again. We're going to go right into, let me find Tammy Bruce. There she is, The Death of Right and Wrong. She's been on this chapter about feminism and the National Organization for Women, and how they have transformed over the decades from being an organization that was about supporting women and their individual rights to an organization that has become radicalized and is basically supporting murder. The feminist elite are troubled by a verdict that tells society that if a woman kills her children, she will go to jail. Now may not have succeeded in freeing Andrea Yates, but the fallout from their brainwashing has only just begun. And what of Houston Now, the chapter that organized the support coalition for Yates? Following the verdict, their e-group posted a message from their president lovingly describing, quote, a note from Andrea, unquote. The message reads in part, quote, I received a note from Andrea. I have been sending her cards, and she expressed appreciation for them and for the support she has been given, unquote. Members are then given Yates's prison address so they, too, can enjoy being her pen pals. It won't surprise you to learn that another message from Houston Now's, coordinator posted at around the same time reads, quote, Pledge of Allegiance declared unconstitutional It's about time, unquote. There was also a posting referring members to a Catholic-bashing internet site, giving emotional support to a mass murderer while cheering attacks on Christianity and on public mentions of God is not my kind of feminism. But it does make perfect sense for the malignant narcissists who infest the feminist establishment today, breaking their own promise. Some think now's disintegration into a cabal of so-called feminists against men, religion, and progress is a return to the past. On the contrary, the past is when now's leadership was actually feminist. The organization I described for you as it was in the late 60s and through the 70s was driven by a statement of purpose that has actually been disowned by the current gang. Here are the first few lines of the brilliant original document, along with the disclaimer added by today's Now. The National Organization for Women's 1966 Statement of Purpose. Notice, this is a historic document, and by the way, I'm reading from, the document itself that she's citing or quoting here. A historic document which was adopted at NOW's first national conference in Washington, D.C. on October 29, 1966. The words are those of the 1960s and do not reflect current language or NOW's current priorities. We, men and women who hereby constitute ourselves as the National Organization for Women, believe that the time has come for a new movement toward true equality for all women in America and toward a fully equal partnership of the sexes. As part of the worldwide revolution of human rights now taking place within and beyond our national borders, the purpose of NOW is to take action to bring women into full participation in the mainstream of American society now, exercising all the privileges and responsibility thereof in truly equal partnership with men. This was the promise of NOW when it began. It clearly no longer is. The hostility to the idea of an actual partnership of the sexes is exhibited all too clearly in that truly sad disclaimer. In the proposal for a new statement of purpose, all positive references to men have been eliminated. This version is openly sexist. The new reference to men is as follows, quote, "We envision a world where patriarchal culture and male dominance no longer oppress us or our earth," unquote. It would be worthwhile for the women toying with such sentiments to realize that it is the actions and choices of men during the past 40 years that have helped women succeed in our fight for equity. Remember, social progress only happens when those in society's privileged classes choose to give up their status. Certainly, activism on the part of the unenfranchised can influence those in power, as it has done throughout our country's history and as it does now. But without those in power choosing to make a difference, nothing would ever happen. White men voted and died to free black men. Men voted to give women the vote. Men acted to change the world, so women could act with them. How dare the so-called feminists still claim that ours is a, quote, patriarchal, oppressive society, unquote, when it is due in great part to actions of men that we have the freedom and equity we enjoy today. So, let's see. The only thing that I wanted to mention about that is she was, quote, where was the quote here? We envision a world where, no, that's not the part, progress. Oh, where is it? Responsibilities are promised now. It's hostility, the idea of actuals. Nope, that's not a sad disclaimer. Brilliant original document. Movement, true equality. Oh, there it is. As a part of the worldwide revolution of human rights now taking place within and beyond our national borders. And that was part of their 1966 Statement of Purpose, and it's incorrect. There is no such thing as human rights. There's no human rights, there's no animal rights, there's no chimpanzee rights, there's no group rights. There's no women's rights because there are no men's rights. There's no black rights because there are no white rights. There is only the rights of the individual, no matter who that individual happens to be. So that's what that statement should have said. A worldwide revolution, perhaps, in individual rights. And no matter who the individual is, male, female, or no matter what their race, creed, etc. So, when I come back, I'm going to be reading some from David Horowitz's Black Books of the American Left. And thank you very much. And so in this particular chapter, let's see if where we're at where we left this. It's about the Soviet Union after the Vietnam War. Let's see, and about Soviet strategy. During each December anniversary of the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, when liberal politicians rediscover the Mujahideen guerrillas in the hills after 11 months of moral amnesia, there are blithe references to Afghanistan as Russia's Vietnam. Those who invoke the analogy seem to think that simply by doing so they have doomed the Russian stormtroopers to defeat. But this analogy is based on a misunderstanding of what Vietnam was and what Afghanistan is. Unlike America's high-tech television war, Afghanistan is one of those old-fashioned encounters that take place in the dark. Soviets make no attempt to win hearts and minds. The My Lies that are daily occurrences there cause no shock because they do not appear on Moscow TV. There are no scenes of the peasant children whose hands and faces have been destroyed by anti-personnel bombs in the shapes of toy trucks and butterflies that the Soviets have strewn over the Afghan countryside. There are no images of body bags being offloaded from Soviet transports because there's no media coverage. There can be no growing revulsion on the home front, no protests on Soviet campuses and in Soviet streets, no clamor to bring the boys home. Afghanistan is not the Soviets' Vietnam for another reason. Not only are the Soviet people kept from seeing the atrocities their government has committed, the rest of the world is blacked out too. At the height of the Vietnam War, there was a non-combatant army of foreign journalists present to witness its conduct. In Afghanistan, they are forbidden, as are the Red Cross and all other international relief agencies that were integral to what happened in Vietnam. Without those witnesses, Afghanistan is a matter of out of sight, out of mind. In Vietnam, we waged a war against ourselves and lost. The Soviets will not let that happen to them. The truth of the Vietnam analogy is not that guerrillas must inevitably bog down and defeat a superior force of invaders, but that a war against indigenous forces by a superpower can be won if it is waged against a backdrop of international ignorance and apathy. The proper analogy for Afghanistan is not Vietnam at all, but rather 1930s Spain. Not in the nature of the war, but in the symbolic value it has for our time, or should have, in terms of democracy's will to resist aggression. Aid to the Mujahideen should not be a dirty little secret of the CIA, but a matter of public policy and national honor. Perhaps the leading feature of the left today is the moral selectivity that French social critic Jean-François Revel has identified as, quote, the syndrome of the cross-eyed left, unquote. Leftists can describe Vietnam's conquest and colonization of Cambodia as a, quote, rescue mission, unquote, while reviling Ronald Reagan for applying the same term to the Grenada operation. Although better than 90% of the island's population told independent pollsters they were grateful for the arrival of U.S. troops. Forgetting for a moment that Afghanistan is, quote, Russia's Vietnam, unquote, leftists call Grenada, quote, America's Afghanistan, unquote. Although people in Afghanistan, as one member of the resistance there told us, would literally die for the elections held in Grenada. The left's memory can be as selective as its morality. When it comes to past commitments that have failed, the left's mentality is utterly unable to produce a coherent balance sheet, let alone a profit and loss statement. The attitude towards Soviet penetration of the Americas is a good example. Current enthusiasm for the Sandinista regime in Nicaragua should recall to those of us old enough to remember a previous enthusiasm for Cuba 25 years ago. Many of us began our new leftism with the Fair Play for Cuba demonstrations. We raised our voices and chanted, Cuba sí, Yankee no. We embraced Fidel Castro not only because of the flamboyant personal style of the Barbudos of his 26th of July movement, but also because the Castro assured the world that his revolution belonged to neither communists nor capitalists, that it was neither red nor black, but Cuban, olive, green. We attributed Castro's expanding links with Moscow to the U.S.-sponsored invasion of the Bay of Pigs, and then to the, quote, secret war, unquote, waged against Cuba by U.S. intelligence and paramilitary organizations. But while Castro's apologists in the United States may find it expedient to maintain these fictions, Carlos Franqui and other Fidelists now in exile have made it clear that Castro embraced the Soviets even before the U.S. hostility became decisive, and that he steered his country into the Soviet bloc with considerable enthusiasm. Before the Bay of Pigs, he put a Soviet general in charge of Cuban forces. Before the Bay of Pigs, he destroyed Cuba's democratic trade union movement, although its elected leadership was drawn from his own 26th of July movement. He did so because he knew that the Stalinists of Cuba's Communist Party would be dependable cheerleaders and efficient policemen of his emerging dictatorship. A symbolic event along the way that many of us missed was Castro's imprisonment of his old comrade, Huber Matos, liberator of Matanzas province and one of the 4 key military leaders of the revolution. Matos' crime? Criticizing the growing influence of Cuban communists, thereby jeopardizing Castro's plans to use them as his palace guard. Matos' sentence? 20 years in a 4-by-11-foot concrete box. Given such a precedent, how can we fail to support Eden Pastora for taking up arms against early signs of similar totalitarianism in Nicaragua? What has come of Cuba's revolution to break the chains of American imperialism? Soviets administer the still one-crop Cuban economy, Soviets train the Cuban army, and Soviet subsidies, fully 1/4 of Cuba's gross national product, prevent the Cuban treasury from going broke. Before the revolution, there were more than 35 independent newspapers and radio stations in Havana. Now there's only one official voice, Grandma, the Cuban Pravda, and a handful of other outlets sprouting the same party line. Today, Cuba is a more abject and deformed colony of the Soviet Empire than it ever was of America. The arch-rebel of our youth, Fidel Castro, has become a party hack who cheerfully endorsed the rape of Czechoslovakia in 1968 and endorses the ongoing plunder of Afghanistan today. An aging pimp who sells his young men to the Russians for use in their military adventures in return for $10 billion a year. Back in a minute. And thank you. And so I'm going to let the rest of that chapter go, and we'll pick up on Chapter 2, My Vietnam Lessons, next time. So at this point, that brings us to the end of another episode of The Drill. And until next time, thank you very much for listening, and have a great day.